Okay, so today we're going to talk about rivalry and more specifically the microenvironment. So far this semester we've talked about a number of things with respect to competition. If you remember from lesson one, the course is about competition. Then we started to kind of break that down into different levels. We spoke about the pest model and the macro competitive environment, and now we're going to start really going into the microenvironment. As I said in the last lesson, the microenvironment is really important for the study of strategic management and competition. And so we will spend actually quite a few weeks on this topic. We will start today. We'll discuss things like industry structure, how we measure that, what it means, what are the different types of industry structures. We will go into other things such as vertical competition, regulation, how corporations deal with regulation. All of these topics have to do with the microenvironment. And just as a reminder, in the first lesson we had a figure that looks something like this, and so let me revert back to that for a minute. We have our internal, and we'll spend a good deal of the second half of the semester on the internal resources and capabilities of the firms. What are the attributes that firms have where they can actually compete to win in the environment? And then we spent some time in the last few weeks here, and we'll call this our pest or macro environment. So that's going to be our pest or macro. And now what we're going to do is we're going to spend quite a bit of time here, and this is going to be our micro environment. So all in here. Okay? And when we say microenvironment, again, this is outside of the firm, so that might not necessarily be intuitive. This is outside of the firm, but it's the competitors, the regulators, all of the different entities and people we have to deal with that are really, really directly related and close proximity to the firm. Okay. So again, we also discussed in the past week or so our ways to break down competitive environments. Okay, so we had kind of this funnel model in the last lesson, and we started very broad, maybe with a sector, and then we went to an industry, and then a market, and then a sub-market. Okay? And for today's discussion, for this lesson, I am not going to necessarily discern or distinguish between industries and markets. There is a difference that was in the last lesson, but for today, when I say industry structure, I may say market structure. You can say that those things are synonymous for at least this lesson, just because the terminology gets a little bit tricky. So we have this breakdown from broad to narrow. So what we're going to talk about first is kind of what do we mean by rivalry? What do we mean by competition? In the microenvironment, what are we talking about? Well, the first thing I want you to understand is what we're going to discuss this week is all about horizontal competition. And if that's not a term that you've heard before, it probably isn't. Let me just explain. Horizontal competition is competition between competitors. So it's between two companies that do basically the same thing in the same market or industry. For example, Pepsi and Coke, or American Airlines and United, or Miller and Anheuser-Busch. Right? So that's what we're talking about when we talk about horizontal competition. We will, at the end of this lesson, start to discuss vertical competition. Don't worry about that for now. Vertical competition is more of the competition when you're talking about your interactions with your supply chain, for example. So don't worry about that for now. We'll discuss that at the end of this lesson, as well as much more fully in the next lesson. So today is all about horizontal competition. Make sure you make a note of that.